Renata had spent years quietly giving everything she had to her only son, Max, and his wife, Lena. She paid their rent every month, bought furniture for their house, filled their empty fridge, and even saved money to give them as a wedding gift. She imagined the day they would get married, how proud she would feel standing beside them, how happy it would make her to see her son start a new chapter with her support. But when she asked about their wedding, Lena looked her in the eye with a cold smile and said, "We got married yesterday. We only invited special people." Those words pierced Renata's heart like ice. In that moment, all the love, effort, and sacrifices she had made meant nothing to them. She stood there holding the phone like it weighed 1,000 pounds while Max avoided her gaze. The dress she had bought for the wedding still hung in her closet, unused, along with the shoes she had chosen carefully. She had spent weeks planning for this moment, hoping to be part of something meaningful, but instead she was left out completely, treated like she did not matter. It was the moment her heart cracked, not just from being excluded, but from realizing how invisible she had become to the people she loved the most. That night, Renata lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every sacrifice she had made. The more she thought, the more something inside her shifted. By morning, her sadness had turned into a quiet strength she had never felt before. She sat at her kitchen table with a pen and paper, adding up everything she had spent on Max and Lena over the past 3 years. The rent, the furniture, the gifts, the emergencies. The total stunned her. It was not just money. It was pieces of her life she had given away, hoping it would buy love that never came. That day, she walked to the bank and canceled every transfer she had set up for them. It was the first time in years she had done something only for herself. When Max and Lena later showed up at her house with a lawyer, trying to scare her into giving them power over her money, she stood her ground. They tried to make her believe she was confused, too old to manage her own life, but she didn't flinch. With steady eyes and a firm voice, she told them her money was no longer their safety net. When they left, slamming the door behind them, Renata stood in the silence of her living room and felt something powerful rising inside her. Freedom dawned in the days that followed. Renata began to rebuild her life piece by piece, this time with herself at the center. She changed the locks on her doors, installed security cameras, and opened a new bank account they could never reach. For the first time in years, she walked through her days without checking her phone for their calls or worrying about their bills. She went to the beauty salon she had avoided for so long, letting herself be cared for without guilt. She even visited her husband's grave, speaking to him softly about how she had lost herself trying to be the perfect mother, and how she was finally finding her way back. As she spent time with her neighbor Eleanor and reconnected with her sister Diana, she realized how much of her life she had given up to please people who never truly saw her. These new connections wrapped around her like warmth she had forgotten existed. Slowly, Renata stopped feeling like someone abandoned and began to feel like someone awakening, a woman, discovering her own worth after years of being treated like she had none. But Max and Lena were not ready to let go of the life they had built on Renata's sacrifices. When they saw the money stop flowing, their worry turned into desperation. They began circling her life like vultures, showing up at her house, calling from different numbers, and even filing complaints to make her look unstable. They accused her of losing her mind, of being confused and paranoid, hoping to convince others she couldn't handle her own affairs. It was a cruel attempt to take control of her finances by painting her as weak. But Renata was no longer the fragile woman they remembered. With the help of her lawyer, Mr. Weber, she gathered every receipt, every bank record, and even proof of her clean mental health. She faced their lies with calm determination, no longer begging for their love, only defending her right to live free. Their attacks no longer broke her, they only made her stronger. For the first time, Renata wasn't afraid of them. She was ready to fight back, not with anger, but with truth. The fight soon moved into the courtroom, where the weight of years of pain hung in the air. Max and Lena came dressed like grieving victims, pretending they were worried children trying to protect an old, confused woman. They spoke with practiced sadness, telling the judge that Renata had become paranoid, isolated, and unable to make decisions. But as their lies filled the room, Renata stood tall, her voice steady and clear. One by one, her lawyer called witnesses, her pharmacist, her neighbors, and even a psychiatrist who had tested her mind and found it sharper than most people half her age. They all spoke about her strength, her independence, and her clarity. When it was her turn, Renata told her story with dignity, explaining how she had been used for years, treated like an endless wallet instead of a mother. Her words were calm, but carried the weight of truth. By the end, even the courtroom seemed to shift. The judge looked at her not as a frail old woman, but as someone who had survived betrayal and chosen herself. And when the verdict came, it was like a door unlocking. The case was dismissed, and Renata was freed as Renata stepped out of the courthouse. A lightness spread through her chest, as if years of invisible chains had finally fallen away. The sun felt warmer, the air clearer, and for the first time in so long, the world seemed hers again. That evening, her neighbor Eleanor gathered their small circle of friends to celebrate, filling Renata's home with laughter instead of tension. They toasted to her courage, to her strength, and to the new life she had chosen for herself. In the weeks that followed, Renata sold her house and moved into a bright apartment in the city, a place that belonged only to her. She donated part of her money to charities that helped other elderly people facing family abuse, determined to turn her pain into something meaningful. With the rest, she began to truly live, traveling, painting, meeting new people, and smiling without guilt. Max and Lena faded from her life, forced to stand on their own at last. And as Renata watched the city lights from her new balcony one quiet night, she realized something powerful. She was no longer waiting to be seen as special by anyone. She was already special to herself. From that moment on, Renata's life became her own story, not a side role in someone else's. She woke up each morning with a sense of peace she had never known, sipping her coffee without dread or duty pulling at her heart. She filled her days with art classes, quiet walks through museums, and weekend trips to places she had always dreamed of seeing. There were no frantic phone calls, no sudden emergencies to solve, no one draining her spirit for their comfort. For the first time in decades, her love, her time, and her money belonged to her alone. Sometimes she thought of Max and Lena, but their memory no longer carried pain, only lessons. They had shown her how dangerous it was to lose herself for people who only valued what she gave, not who she was. And though they had tried to break her, they had instead uncovered her strength. Renata now lived each day with a calm joy, knowing she didn't need to be someone's special person anymore, because she had finally become her own dot as months passed. Renata's world blossomed in ways she never imagined. She built a circle of genuine friends who valued her laughter more than her bank balance. They shared dinners, told stories, and filled her home with warmth that was never tied to obligation. She even reconnected with her sister Diana, and their conversations were no longer shadowed by money or guilt, just love and understanding. Renata found herself smiling at strangers, humming as she painted, and feeling proud when she looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at her no longer seemed tired or forgotten. She was alive, confident, and free. Sometimes late at night, she would stand on her balcony watching the stars and quietly thank the version of herself who had been brave enough to walk away from the people who tried to control her. That courage had given her everything she once thought she had lost: peace, dignity, and the chance to live life on her own terms. Renata had finally learned that real love is not something you buy, it's something you give to yourself first. Asterisk, asterisk. Renata felt certain of one thing. She was no longer surviving for scraps of affection. She was living fully, boldly, and with Lubbock's as her own special person. The later, Renata's story had become a quiet legend among the people who knew her, not because of the money she had on, and years later, Renata's story had become a quiet legend among the people who knew her, not because of the money she had once GI. With each passing season, Renata's life grew brighter, not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer living in fear of being unloved. She spent her mornings painting soft colors on canvas, her afternoons exploring quiet bookshops, and her evenings sharing laughter with people who truly saw her. The emptiness that once echoed inside her home had been replaced by music, flowers, and the sound of her own happiness. Max and Lena became distant shadows from another life, people she no longer chased, defended, or mourned. Instead, she poured her energy into nurturing herself, into becoming the kind of woman she had once believed she needed others to complete. She discovered that strength could be gentle, and freedom could be peaceful. And as she stood one evening watching the sunset bleed gold across the sky, Renata felt certain of one thing. She was no longer surviving for scraps of affection. She was living fully, boldly, and with love, as her own special person. Years later, Renata's story had become a quiet legend among the people who knew her, not because of the money she had once given away, but because of the courage she found to reclaim her life. She had grown older, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a glow that came from choosing herself. Her home was now filled with her own paintings, bright and alive, each one carrying the colors of her freedom. Children in her neighborhood called her the kind lady with the sunny laugh, and she smiled knowing they saw her for who she truly was, not for what she could give them. Sometimes she thought of Max and Lena with a calm heart, wishing them growth, but no longer longing for their love. That longing had once chained her. Now it no longer had power. Renata had become living proof that it is never too late to start over, never too late to choose peace over chaos, and never too late to love yourself enough to walk away. She was no longer just someone's mother or provider. She was Renata, whole, free, and finally home within herself. In her quiet moments, Renata often sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world move gently outside, and felt a deep, steady joy rise in her chest. There was no weight on her shoulders anymore, no fear of being forgotten or replaced. She no longer measured her worth by what she gave to others. She measured it by how fully she lived each day. The woman who once trembled at the thought of being alone now treasured her solitude like a soft blanket, warm and safe. She wrote letters to her younger self, forgiving her for the years she spent begging for scraps of love, and thanking her for finding the strength to break free. Renata had not only survived her heartbreak, she had transformed it into a new life built on self-respect, peace, and quiet happiness. And as she whispered goodnight to her reflection each evening, she smiled, knowing she had finally given herself the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be loved by the only person who had been there all along, herself. As time gently carried her forward, Renata realized her life had become everything she once believed was out of reach. She woke each day without dread, moved through her hours without guilt, and went to sleep without tears. Her heart no longer waited for apologies that would never come or love that had to be purchased. Instead, it overflowed with calm gratitude for the life she had created on her own terms. She had turned pain into purpose, silence into strength, and loneliness into peaceful independence. People who met her now saw only a graceful, content woman, unaware of the storm she had survived to stand in the sunlight. And Renata liked it that way. Her past no longer defined her. It had simply shaped the path that led her here. She was no longer the woman begging to be seen as special. She was the woman who had proven, Through every quiet and fearless choice, that she always was Dot in the golden calm of her later years. Renata felt as though life had finally returned what it once took from her, not in riches or grand gestures, but in peace, laughter, and the simple joy of being enough. Her days were slow and beautiful, filled with music in the mornings, soft walks under the trees in the afternoons, and cozy evenings wrapped in books and quiet light. She no longer questioned her worth or feared being forgotten. She had become her own safe place, her own source of love. Looking back, she saw not the woman who was betrayed, but the woman who chose herself despite it all, who walked through heartbreak and came out glowing. Renata knew now that freedom had been waiting for her all along, just beyond the fear of letting go. And as she stood one evening on her balcony, the sky painted in fading gold, she smiled softly to herself, certain of one final truth. She had not just found peace. She had become at Dot as the seasons continued to change. Renata carried her peace like a quiet crown, never loud but always present. She no longer needed anyone to prove her value or fill the empty spaces she once felt inside. They were already full, overflowing with her own love and light. The pain that had once seemed endless had softened into distant echoes, reminders of how far she had come. She often thought of her journey not as an escape, but as a return back to the woman she had been before the weight of others' needs buried her spirit. Now she lived gently but firmly, protecting her heart, her time, and her joy as treasures she had earned. And in her heart, she knew this was her real victory, not just surviving the betrayal, but building a life where she no longer had to fight for love because she had found it within herself. Renata was free, completely, quietly, beautifully free. Dot in the soft quiet of her new life, Renata often caught herself smiling for no reason at all. It wasn't the smile of someone trying to be brave or polite. It was the smile of someone finally at peace. She had stopped searching for approval, stopped shrinking to keep others comfortable, and stopped giving pieces of herself away to be accepted. What remained was a woman whole and unshaken, steady like the roots of an old tree. She knew now that love built on conditions was never love at all, and that she didn't need to be chosen by anyone to be worthy. She had chosen herself fully, finally, and without apology. And as the evening sun poured golden light across her balcony, Renata closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and felt a calm certainty settle in her soul. She had not just escaped her past. She had outgrown it. Dot with each new dawn. Renata's life felt like a quiet celebration, not loud or grand, but deeply meaningful. She no longer carried the weight of old wounds, and her heart was no longer shaped by the opinions or neglect of others. Instead, it was steady, warm, and full of her own light. She spent her mornings tending to the little garden on her balcony, her afternoons painting in soft silence, and her evenings watching the world glow as the sun went down. There were no more desperate hopes, no more hidden grief, only the simple joy of being herself. Renata had become everything she once needed: kind, safe, strong, and free. And as the stars began to bloom in the night sky, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would never again give away her worth for someone's approval. She had found her peace, and she intended to keep it for the rest of her life. As the years gently passed, Renata's life became a living proof that healing was possible, even after the deepest heartbreak. She had turned the pages of her story from sorrow to strength, and each new chapter was written with calm joy. People admired her for her grace, yet none could see the battles she had once fought just to stand in this peace. She didn't need them to. What mattered was that she had faced the storm, walked through it, and come out glowing on the other side. Her home was quiet but full of life. Flowers on the windowsill, soft music in the background, and her own laughter echoing through the rooms. She no longer thought of what she had lost, only of what she had found, herself. And as she rocked gently in her chair one golden evening, She smiled with the certainty that her story was no longer about betrayal, but about becoming. She had not just survived, she had bloomed.